A young couple driving coast to coast vanished from a lonely stretch of highway in the American West in 2009, somewhere between a gas stop and a promised phone call home. Police said they likely ran off the road in accident, nothing more. But there was no wreckage, no skid marks, no bodies. Just silence. 15 years passed. Then, during a routine drought inspection, a reservoir revealed something metal glinting beneath the waterline. Divers descended and found the couple's vehicle, doors sealed, time frozen inside. What they discovered next forced investigators to confront a far more disturbing possibility. The morning they left, the sky was clear enough to make promises feel permanent. Their car sat in the driveway before dawn, trunk packed tight, backseat cluttered with fast food napkins, a folded road atlas, and a pillow that still smelled like home. Neighbors would later say nothing seemed unusual, no arguments, no rushed goodbyes, no sense that this was the last time anyone would see them. Just a couple chasing a long drive, and the idea that everything ahead was still unwritten. She stood at the passenger door, phone pressed between shoulder and ear, laughing softly. "Yeah, Mom, we'll call tonight. As soon as we stop somewhere decent," she said, rolling her eyes toward him as he checked the tire pressure. "No, I promise. Not just a text." He closed the trunk with a solid thud and leaned against the car, smiling as if the road itself were already calling him. This drive, coast to coast, no strict schedule, just miles, was supposed to reset everything. New job prospects. Time together, space to think. They weren't running away from anything. That's what everyone agreed on later. Before getting in, he snapped a quick photo of the dashboard as the odometer ticked over, proof of a beginning. She teased him about it. "You and your milestones," she said. "Someday we'll want to remember this exact moment," he replied. The engine turned over. The driveway emptied. And just like that, the story moved out onto the highway. The first few hours were easy music loud, windows cracked, landscape slowly changing. They stopped at a roadside diner just before noon. The waitress remembered them because they argued playfully over pie flavors and left a generous tip. Nothing about the stop suggested finality. Just two people passing through. By late afternoon, the road stretched longer and emptier. Cell service flickered in and out. The terrain flattened, then rose again, sunlight bleaching the color from everything it touched. She took a short video from the passenger seat, panning across the horizon. "Middle of nowhere," she joked, posting it online. It would become the last public trace of them alive. At 6:17 p.m., his phone connected long enough to make a call. "Hey," he said to his brother, voice crackling through static. "We're good. Probably gonna push a little farther tonight." There was a pause. Wind noise. "Yeah, it's quiet out here. Kind of nice, actually." Those words, "kind of nice," would echo later, repeated by family members as if saying them enough times might change what came next. The call dropped before goodbyes could fully form. Night came faster than expected. The highway narrowed. No streetlights, no towns for miles. The GPS rerouted them twice, blinking warnings about limited connectivity. She suggested stopping. He said they were almost past the worst stretch. Somewhere along that road, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not with a scream or a sudden impact. Just a subtle crossing from known to unknown. When the promised evening call never came, no one panicked at first. Phones die. Plans change. By midnight, concern crept in. By morning, it hardened into dread. Their car was never seen at the motel they'd mentioned. Credit cards showed no activity. No traffic cameras caught their plates after sunset. It was as if the road had simply absorbed them. By the end of that first day, one fact was undeniable. A couple on a simple cross-country drive had vanished without witnesses, without wreckage, without explanation. And somewhere beyond the reach of cell towers and streetlights, the open road kept its secret. The desert doesn't announce itself when something goes wrong. It just keeps breathing, wind sliding over scrub, heat settling into the asphalt, indifferent to panic or absence. By mid-morning the next day, phones across 3 states were ringing unanswered. Her mother left a voicemail that started calm and ended tight with worry. His brother texted twice, then again an hour later, each message shorter than the last. No replies came back. Their devices went straight to voicemail, as if powered down deliberately. By noon, the family began reconstructing the last known hours with the precision of people clinging to control. They said they were pushing a little farther, his brother told the dispatcher, pacing his kitchen. "Somewhere out west. Desert, I think. Police logged it as a welfare check at first. Adults on a road trip, no signs of distress. Still, a patrol unit made a quiet call to highway services, asking if there had been any late-night accidents, any abandoned vehicles reported. Nothing came up. Investigators pulled phone records. The last confirmed ping placed them on a long, isolated stretch of highway that cut through barren land, no rest stops, no towns, no cameras. A road designed to be passed through, not remembered. A state trooper drove the route that afternoon, scanning ditches and culverts, easing his cruiser along the shoulder as if expecting the car to suddenly appear, nose down in the dirt. The terrain rolled gently, deceptively tame. Low brush, shallow ravines, no obvious drop-offs. If they went off here, he muttered into his radio, we'd see something. Gas stations within a 100-mile radius were canvassed. One clerk remembered a couple who matched their description. Another wasn't sure. Receipts were checked, then checked again. The timeline tightened, then frayed. By evening, the word missing was spoken out loud. Search and rescue teams were notified, but resources were limited. Without a confirmed crash site, there was nowhere to focus. Helicopters flew short patterns, eyes tracing the edges of pavement, the places where tired drivers drift. Nothing reflected back. What unsettled investigators most wasn't what they found, it was what they didn't. No skid marks, no broken guardrails, no shattered glass catching sunlight. Their car, a mid-sized sedan, dark-colored, unremarkable, should have left a scar if it had left the road at speed. Instead, the highway looked untouched, as if the night had passed without incident. A detective from the county sheriff's office joined the case late that night. He listened more than he spoke, flipping through notes, eyes lingering on the map. Accidents leave messes, he finally said, even clean ones. Family members clung to the idea that the couple had pulled over engine trouble, maybe, and wandered too far. Heat, exhaustion, disorientation. But dogs brought in the next morning picked up no scent. Not on the shoulder, not in the brush. It was as if the couple had been erased between 2 points on a line. By the third day, news outlets picked up the story. Photos circulated, smiling faces, arms around each other, frozen in happier light. Tips poured in, most vague, some hopeful, a few dark. I saw a car like that near a reservoir, one caller claimed. Another insisted they'd been picked up by a stranger. None of it solidified into fact. As night fell again over the desert, searchlights swept ground that had already been walked twice. The air cooled rapidly, the kind of cold that slips into bones. Somewhere, coyotes called out, their voices echoing across the emptiness. Standing on the shoulder of that highway, a volunteer whispered what everyone was thinking but no one wanted to say. It's like they were never here. And with every passing hour, the last contact, those crackling words about how quiet it was, felt less like a casual remark and more like a warning the desert had chosen not to explain. By the fourth day, the search had a rhythm, and that was what frightened everyone most. At dawn, volunteers gathered near the highway turnout, sipping burnt coffee from paper cups, stretching stiff muscles, staring out at land that looked the same in every direction. Maps were unfolded on truck hoods. Sections were assigned. Names were written down and crossed off. The process felt organized, almost hopeful. But the ground beneath their boots told a different story. This place hid things too well. Searchers moved slowly, eyes trained on subtle disruptions, a crushed patch of brush, a disturbed line of dirt, anything that suggested a vehicle had strayed from asphalt to earth. The desert offered nothing. Wind erased footprints overnight. Sun flattened contrast. What little color existed blended seamlessly into itself. A sheriff's deputy crouched near a shallow ravine, fingers tracing dry soil. If a car went down here, he said quietly to the detective beside him, there'd be debris, something. The detective nodded, unsmiling. He'd worked rural cases before. He knew how often accidents were blamed when answers ran out. Still, something about this one resisted that explanation. Helicopters flew grid patterns at low altitude, rotors chopping the air, sending dust spiraling. From above, the land looked deceptively simple, open, readable, but pilots reported the same thing over and over. Negative visual, nothing out of place. Canine units were brought in next. Handlers walked the shoulder where the couple's phones last pinged, boots crunching against gravel. Dogs sniffed, paused, then pulled away, confused. One handler radioed in, frustration bleeding through his voice. No track. Not even partial. By afternoon, the heat pressed down hard. Volunteers slowed. Radios crackled less frequently. People began searching with their eyes rather than their instincts, hope thinning with each mile covered. At a briefing, someone finally said it out loud. What if they never left the road? The question hung there. Investigators began to consider alternatives. Could they have been picked up? Forced into another vehicle? It seemed unlikely, no witnesses, no signs of struggle. Could they have intentionally disappeared? Family members bristled at the suggestion. They loved each other. Her sister snapped when the idea was raised. They loved their lives. You don't just erase yourself by accident. Still, theories multiplied in the absence of evidence. Mechanical failure. Medical emergency. A wrong turn taken too late to undo. A local rancher came forward that evening. He'd been driving a service road parallel to the highway late that night. I saw headlights slow, he said, hat clenched in his hands, thought someone was pulling over, didn't stop. Investigators pressed him for details, location, time, direction, but memory blurred under scrutiny. Headlights were everywhere out here, or nowhere. As days turned into a week, the search perimeter expanded, then quietly contracted. Resources were reassigned. The helicopters left first, then the dogs, then most of the volunteers. The detective stayed. He walked the stretch alone one evening, boots echoing softly against pavement. He stopped where the phone records ended and stared out at the darkening land. If you left the road here, he murmured, where did you go? The answer didn't come. Behind him, the highway hummed faintly as a semi passed, wind tugging at his jacket. Ahead, the desert swallowed the last light of day. Somewhere beneath that vast stillness, logic said there had to be a trace, a mistake, a mark, a fragment of truth. But the ground remained unbroken. When the search was officially scaled back, families were notified with careful language. No new leads. Efforts will continue as information becomes available. Phrases meant to comfort but hollow in practice. Her mother drove the route herself the next morning, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. She pulled over at random points, stepped out into the heat, and called her daughter's name into the wind. Only silence answered. By the time the case was labeled cold, one thing had become painfully clear. Whatever happened to the couple had not announced itself with violence or chaos. It had happened quietly. So quietly that even now, standing on that road, it felt possible, terrifyingly possible, that the truth was still there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to look in exactly the right place. Time did not move forward cleanly after the search ended. It dragged. In the months that followed, life split into two versions before the drive, and everything after. Holidays arrived like intrusions. Birthdays were marked quietly, cards written and never sent. Their photos stayed where they were, smiling from frames that no one had the heart to take down. The case file grew thinner as the years went on. Detectives rotated out. New ones skimmed the reports, tracing fingers over the same maps, asking the same questions, then quietly placing the folder back on the shelf. Presumed accident remained the unofficial conclusion, even if no one could explain where or how. For the families, the uncertainty was worse than grief. If they'd told us they were gone, his father once said to a detective, voice steady but eyes glassy, we'd have learned how to live with that. But this keeps them suspended. Rumors surfaced and dissolved. A supposed sighting in another state. A social media account that looked almost right. A call that rang once and disconnected. Each lead briefly reignited hope before collapsing under scrutiny. As the desert reclaimed its silence, alternate theories took root. Some believed the couple had driven into a body of water, an unseen canal, a reservoir hidden by darkness. Investigators dismissed it early. No nearby water matched the phone ping location. No guardrails were damaged. No witnesses reported a splash or lights disappearing. Others whispered about foul play. A wrong place, wrong time encounter. A passing vehicle. A crime that left no trace. But again, there was nothing solid to hold on to. No blood, no abandoned items, no suspects. Years passed anyway. Her mother stopped calling police after the 5th anniversary. Not because she'd given up, but because repeating the story hurt too much. His brother marked the date privately, taking long drives of his own, stopping sometimes just to sit and listen to the engine idle. The highway where they vanished remained unchanged. Traffic flowed. New asphalt was laid in sections. Mile markers were replaced. The road forgot what people could not. By year 10, the case was rarely mentioned outside the family. It existed as a quiet ache, flaring unexpectedly at weddings they didn't attend, jobs they never took, futures that never happened. Then came the drought. It started as a line in a local paper reservoir levels at historic lows. Counties issued advisories. Boats sat stranded on cracked mud. What had been hidden under water for decades began to reappear: tree stumps, rusted barrels, remnants of roads long submerged. During a routine inspection, a county worker stood at the edge of one shrinking reservoir, scanning the newly exposed shoreline. Something about the angle caught his eye, a shape too straight, too deliberate to be rock or debris. Metal. He squinted, stepping closer, heart ticking faster as the water lapped weakly against a dark outline just beneath the surface. The call went out quietly at first. Then again, more urgently. By the time law enforcement arrived, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the exposed lakebed. An officer waded in, boots sinking into mud, staring down at what looked unmistakably like the roofline of a car that should not have been there. When the license plate was run hours later, the room fell silent. 15 years after a couple vanished on a desert highway, the ground had shifted just enough to give something back. And with that discovery came a realization that unsettled everyone involved. The story they thought had ended hadn't ended at all. It had only been waiting, submerged, for the right moment to surface. The reservoir was never meant to give anything back. By the time investigators cordoned off the shoreline, the waterline had retreated so far it exposed ground that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Cracked mud stretched outward like a dead map, veins of dryness splitting underfoot. At the center of it all sat the shape half submerged, half revealed, as if the earth itself were unsure whether to claim it or surrender it. Divers arrived just after sunrise. They stood quietly for a moment, staring out at the water, each of them aware that this was not a recovery like the others. This wasn't a lost boat or dumped scrap metal. This was a missing persons case that had been breathing underwater for 15 years. The lead diver slipped his mask on and lowered himself into the reservoir. The water was colder than expected, visibility poor. Silt stirred with every movement, clouds blooming and then settling again. As he descended, the outline sharpened. All said done, dark-colored. 4 doors. Upright. Not overturned. Not crumpled. Just parked, as if someone had driven it gently into the lake and walked away. His gloved hand brushed the roof. No deep dents, no signs of violent impact. He moved along the side, shining his light through the murk. The windows were intact. That detail traveled fast, whispered from diver to supervisor, then passed along in careful tones to the waiting detectives. Vehicles that plunge off roads shatter. Glass explodes outward. Metal folds. This car had done none of that. When the divers reached the front doors, they paused. Both were closed. The vehicle was winched free hours later, water streaming from its seams as it emerged into open air for the first time since the night it disappeared. Mud clung to the tires, algae streaked the paint, but the structure held firm, eerily preserved. A detective stood nearby, arms crossed tight against his chest. "Doesn't make sense," he muttered. "Not like this." Inside the car, time had been suspended. Personal items lay where they had last been placed: a jacket folded on the back seat, an empty water bottle in the cup holder, a road atlas partially tucked under the passenger seat. The dashboard clock had stopped at 11:48. No naughty. No obvious signs of struggle. No chaos. For families watching from behind the tape, the sight was devastating. This was proof. And proof, somehow, raised more questions than it answered. If it went in accidentally, one investigator said quietly to another, "Where's the panic? Where's the damage?" The reservoir's history was pulled. Old maps were examined. 15 years earlier, the water level had been significantly higher. From the road above, the lake would have been invisible in the dark. No lights, no barriers, no warning signs. An accident was suddenly plausible again. But then came the details that refused to align. Toxicology would later reveal nothing unusual. The car was in neutral, not drive. The parking brake was not engaged, but neither was there evidence of a sudden loss of control. No skid marks had ever been found leading toward the water. No witnesses remembered headlights veering off. And then there was the angle. The car hadn't plunged. It had descended, slowly, deliberately. As evidence technicians worked, a deputy stared out at the water's surface, voice low. 15 years, he said, and nobody saw it. The realization settled heavily over the scene. This vehicle had been there the entire time, hidden in plain sight beneath a reservoir people fished, boated, and swam in. The couple hadn't vanished into nothing. They had vanished into somewhere. As night fell, Floodlights illuminated the recovery site, harsh white beams cutting through darkness. The car sat wrapped in tarps now, stripped of mystery but heavier with meaning. Investigators knew one thing for certain. Finding the vehicle did not close the case. It reopened it. Because whatever had happened that night did not look like panic or chance, it looked like a decision. And if that was true, then the most terrifying question was still unanswered. Why would two people, on a hopeful journey toward a new future, drive silently into the dark and let the water take them without a single sign of resistance? The truth did not rush in after the car was found. It seeped. In the weeks following the recovery, investigators moved carefully, aware that every conclusion would echo through 15 years of waiting. Evidence was catalogued, recatalogued, then questioned again. The reservoir had preserved the car, but it had also distorted time, blurring intention and accident into something far harder to name. Autopsies confirmed what many feared but needed to hear. The couple had died inside the vehicle. No signs of external injury, no trauma consistent with a high-speed crash. The cause was ruled drowning. Simple, clinical, and deeply unsatisfying. The detective who had stayed on the case the longest sat with the report spread across his desk, eyes fixed on a single line. No defensive wounds, he read aloud to no one. No evidence of struggle, which meant neither of them had tried to escape. That detail haunted everyone. Investigators reconstructed the night again, this time with the reservoir in mind. The road above it curved gently, unlit and unguarded. In total darkness, the water would have blended seamlessly into the land beyond the shoulder. A wrong turn too late to correct could send a car forward instead of straight. But even that explanation faltered under scrutiny. Most accidental water entries trigger instinctive reactions: doors flung open, windows shattered, frantic movement. Yet inside the car, everything remained eerily composed. Seatbelts were not slashed, windows were not broken. The dashboard showed no signs of chaos. It was as if time had slowed for them. A behavioral analyst was consulted. He spoke carefully when addressing the families. Sometimes, he said, fingers interlaced, people freeze, especially if they don't immediately understand what's happening. But privately, he admitted to investigators that the stillness bothered him. Family members listened, absorbing facts that felt too clean for something so devastating. So they just sat there? Her sister asked quietly during a briefing. They didn't fight? No one answered right away. Theories emerged, each one unsettling in its own way. Carbon monoxide exposure? Tests ruled it out. Mechanical failure? Nothing conclusive. A medical emergency affecting one, followed by confusion from the other. Possible but unprovable. And then there was the thought no one wanted to say out loud. Could it have been intentional? The families rejected it immediately, and investigators agreed there was no evidence to support such a conclusion. The couple had made plans. They'd spoken about the future hours before disappearing. There was no note, no warning. Hope, after all, had been packed into that car alongside clothes and maps. In the end, the official ruling landed softly but heavily. Accidental drowning, circumstances unclear. A sentence that answered nothing and everything at once. At the reservoir, the water slowly rose again as seasons changed, reclaiming the cracked shoreline. The spot where the car had rested disappeared beneath the surface, leaving no marker behind. Life moved forward awkwardly, imperfectly. Memorials were held, ashes were scattered. The families, at last, had something solid to grieve. But the question lingered. How could two people vanish so completely, for so long, without anyone noticing they were right there? The detective drove the highway one final time before retirement. He pulled over near where the phone signal had last died, engine ticking softly in the cooling air. He looked toward the reservoir, now hidden again beyond the darkness. "We missed it," he said quietly. "All of us, not out of negligence. Not from indifference, but because sometimes the truth doesn't hide far away, it hides where no one thinks to look." 15 years earlier, a couple vanished on an open road, believing they were headed toward something better. What remained was not a mystery of monsters or conspiracies, but a haunting reminder of how thin the line is between movement and stillness, between being lost and simply unseen, and how easily the world can drive past, unaware, while answers wait just beneath the surface.